the anxiety is not debilitating anymore. I still feel it here and there, but I've come quite a long way on this path. Still wind up back at the beginning again sometimes. That's just part of the process, and I'm okay with that. But I don't have the same anxiety that I used to.
Right.
And that's been as a product of all of the stuff we've talked about. And so I am so much less driven by ego now. The ego doesn't want to be snuffed out, by the way. That's one of the reasons you struggle with it. The ego will protect itself. It'll find subtle ways to pull you back in.
I want to welcome everybody back to Soul Inspired. Today, I have a guest that I've been really excited to talk to, and it's John Huff. He is a podcaster and musician, and from what I know, a past teacher or a current teacher, but we'll talk to him and see more about that. But first of all, thanks, John, for coming on and spending some time with me today.
Joe, it is my privilege. Thank you so much. And congratulations to you, by the way.
Thank you.
Because I, of all people, know how hard it is to get a podcast off the ground. And you've done that. I've listened to several of your episodes. You're doing a great job. So kudos to you, man. Well done.
I appreciate it. I did it. I always say it's a passion project because as an entrepreneur myself, I'm always doing all these different things. And sometimes those things turn into like they feel very business-like. Right. And I didn't want the podcast to get that vibe. I wanted it to be soulful, deep conversations with amazing people and interesting people. That was like my first, so I'm like, I can't turn that into a, what I would consider like too businessy to me. So I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but
it does. But if the opportunity comes along for it to be a business, take it.
Yeah, nice.
Intention is so important and motivation is so important, but there's no reason why, it can't be successful in all the ways. So, but I appreciate that motivation. That's great.
One of the first things I always ask people when I first get them on the podcast, and again, you wear different hats yourself, right? You're doing the podcast and you have a past in music and things like that, or a current in music as well.
I have a current in music, yeah.
Yeah. So I want to,
anybody does.
Yeah, I want to dig into that a little bit. And what I wanted to know, these are all passions that you have. And I don't know if there's a specific event or time in your life that triggered you to go down the path of music, path of being who John Huff is today. But if there is something, is there anything that comes to mind?
How quickly and how deeply do you want to get spiritual, Joe?
Let's go down the rabbit hole,
man. Fundamentally everything stems from music. And I can give you the Coles Notes version of this. So I grew up playing the drums. I started playing drums when I was a teenager. That's cool. I was a church drummer. That was my thing when I was a teenager, one of my things. And then when I went off to university, I eventually sold my drum set for tuition money. I was in my 4th year. That was a rough thing to have to do, but I did that. And I made a vow at that point in time that when my student loans were paid off, when I had the wherewithal and the opportunity, I was going to buy drums again. It was a promise to myself. And it took 10 years, but eventually I was in a position where I could buy drums again, and I did. That put me in my early 30s. And I'd been a hacker as a teenager, right? I never studied. I never learned how to do it properly. And if you watch me play now, you'd think I still don't know how to do it properly, but I started taking lessons and I started taking drums more seriously in my early 30s. I came very late to this party. And I just did that as an aside, as a hobby. And at the time, I was focused very much on being a writer. I thought that was going to be my thing. So I was working on writing fiction, and I was trying to develop this writing career, playing drums in the background. And eventually, I came to a crossroads where writing was not working for me, and I was thoroughly depressed about it, frustrated, and didn't know how to proceed. And it sucked a lot of the life out of what I was trying to do. It was a really, really difficult time. And so I had had opportunities to play drums with people, which I had found ways to say no to because I was afraid. Fundamentally, I had a lack of faith in my own ability, and I didn't think a lot of my playing. I didn't think I was good enough. And so to avoid having to face that, I would find reasons why I couldn't play shows with people. It was terrifying to me. It had been a long time since I'd played for an audience. And then about, I don't know, 13 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, I was in Jamaica with my spouse. And we were on a little vacation. And at that point in time, writing was really falling apart for me. And I was really in a bad place mentally because I didn't know how to proceed and I didn't know what to do. And so one night after dinner, we're at the buffet at this resort, this beautiful resort in Jamaica. And above the buffet was the martini bar. A lot of important insights come at the martini bar, Joe. So I'm upstairs, we're having a martini post dinner, and I'm watching the house band play covers down after dinner, right? All the covers that every cover band plays. These cats are playing them at the resort. And I'm watching these guys, and they're having a ball. They're just having a great time. They're playing great. People are dancing. And I'm watching this from this position of having sort of my creative life falling apart and being upset about it. And I heard a voice, I had an intuition so visceral that it was almost audible. And a voice said, "You have to start playing music now." And
Wow.
I had been avoiding this out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, I heard this, it was distinct and it was really kind of shocking. And so when I got home from that trip, I went on Bandmix. I posted a profile there. This, again, it's like 12, 13 years ago. And eventually hooked up with a couple of people. Their names were Tyler and Mike. Together, Tyler and Mike and I formed a band called Hiroshima Hearts eventually. And we started playing in the local scene, and everything that is my life at this point in time, that was over 10 years ago. Everything in my life now is a product of that, of following that intuition. A couple of years later, I started a music blog, London Groove Machine. I was covering the local scene. I was interviewing people. One of them turned out to be an artist called Carly Thomas. And then I played for many happy years with Carly, and we toured with Carly. And from Carly, I wound up in the circle playing with another artist called Sarah Smith, who I'm sure your audience will know very well. Toured with Sarah all over Europe, all over North America. And from all of that, I started my website, and then the podcast was an extension of that. And so it all dovetails together, and it stems from this moment of listening at long last to a very clear intuition that said, go down this path. And it was frightening, but I was desperate, and I had just enough faith to follow that path. And as a result of that decision, I'm sitting here talking to you at this moment. That's the Coles Notes version of my
Right.
last
I love it.
12 years or so.
No, that's cool. And no, and I, with Carly and Sarah, both of them are amazing artists themselves. And I've had the privilege of being around both of them, played some music with Carly, and and so it's awesome that you've had these different experiences over the time you have. And like you said, you're still doing things now in the
As a
music.
product of that, I mean, my life
Yeah.
is utterly changed from
Right.
that one decision.
And you had that nudge. Was it an actual just knowing, or was it a voice?
Dude, I swear it was audible. Like I
Yeah.
heard a voice.
Yeah.
You have to start
Yeah.
that. Okay, I was at the martini bar. Let's be honest. And I was in Jamaica, but I've heard people say that the island will speak. The
Oh, really?
island speaks. Yeah, I've heard different people say that. It's like, okay, I'm open to these notions. And it was just such a clear intuition. Start playing music. And there's a great irony in that whole thing because, as I said, at the time I was collapsing as a fiction writer, and this life that I thought I was going to have, that I dreamed I was going to have, was falling apart. And that's a difficult thing to experience. And so I quit writing and I focused on playing music. And then when I went to Europe with Sarah for the first time in 2017, I did a tour blog of that experience. That was another intuition. We were in the planning phases of this tour. And I just had another little intuition that said, do a tour blog. I'd seen other artists do daily tour blogs, and it's like, it was really fascinating reading.
Right.
It's like, do that. It's like, okay. I didn't have a website. I didn't have a tablet. I didn't have any of the gear or equipment to do this, but it's like, okay, I'm feeling this intuition. So I did that. We were in Europe for a month, and I tour blogged it every day, and it became really popular. Like Sarah's fans were loving it back home and all that stuff. And after we got home, Sarah and I decided to publish that tour blog. So it's a book. It exists. It's called November, a Month in Europe with Sarah Smith. So the great irony is that in walking away from writing and following this other path, I wound up with a book.
That's really cool.
Isn't it just funny?
Yeah.
Funny how things go if you listen to those messages, if you follow those nudges. It's really been a fascinating thing to look at.
The interesting thing too, and I love that, the interesting thing also is that you probably didn't see it as a book originally.
No,
right?
Not really. No.
Like, I mean,
No,
the original thought of it wasn't like, I'm going to create a book. It was, I'm going to do this blog, document my experience, whatever it is. And then it just starts to kind of turn into that. And you start to go, oh, wow, I could turn that, and I'm going through similar things right now where, you start, even in any kind of business, you can have this like mindset of, okay, this is what I want the business to end up being like. But then it never ends up being exactly how you see it, because you start to do different things and you go, whoa, no, I shouldn't go this direction. I should go this direction. And then you have to take each step and follow that gut, follow that direction. Right. And then all of a sudden you get to that goal or that thing that you're looking at and go, how did I even get here? Well, it's because, I was actually listening to intuitively what I wanted, not just what I thought I needed or whatnot. Right. So
what you thought you wanted.
Right.
It's
right.
So often you have a destination in mind and you have all the steps laid out to get there, and they're the wrong steps.
Right.
And if you keep insisting on those steps, that's when it becomes painful. Like when I even said that, my hand was gripped like this. This is not how you want to live.
No,
right?
No.
This is exhausting and painful, which is
Absolutely.
I'm still learning, by the way. But it's like, yeah, being open to these nudges, and that requires a certain amount of faith that the nudges are coming from somewhere and that they are followable, right? And I'm not great at that, but I'm learning through these experiences. Like, wow, things open up, when you listen to these nudges, right?
Yeah.
It's weird having to be like, you do need to be on top of your stuff, but then allowing a certain amount of flexibility for what the podcaster Dan Carlin of Hardcore History was like. You need to give destiny opportunities to intervene, in what you're doing. And that's a really delicate balance, but maybe you're figuring that out too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've had the privilege of talking to quite a few interesting people at this point, and people who've even had out of body experiences and near death experiences and all these things, and they get these these moments of wisdom through whatever experience they're having. And I've always thought, I'm starting to realize the older I get that there definitely is some kind of programming that happens to us when we're young. Because even if we say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to follow that gut, I'm going to follow my instincts, I'm going to follow it, and we start getting on that track, and we're like, okay, we're going with the flow, and everything feels great. And then at some point, you fall back, and is that the program restarting again? And you kind of go, wait, why am I'm doing it for the wrong reason again? Well, I got to get back. And it's like you said, you're still learning, right? Are we still learning because of the programming that we had, and we're trying to break free of that? It makes me wonder, are there people out there, the Oprahs of the world or the Eckhart Tolles of the world, or those who just kind of follow, they claim to be able to just follow through with whatever comes to them? I'm sure they falter as well, because they're human as well. But how do you get to that point where you're just living in flow?
How many people accomplish that, man? Like,
right.
If there was an easy answer to that, we would all be doing it. What I'm learning lately is that the spiritual path or the intuitive path is circular. I'm learning that in the hard ways. So it's like you're walking along, walking along, walking along, and then all of a sudden you look at your surroundings and you're like, wait, I'm back here again. I
Right.
was going forward. How on earth am I back here again? But that,
Right.
I think we are programmed to live in our heads. I think our education system, I think our whole society is probably very head based, thought based, as opposed to heart based or
Right.
intuitively based. I think that's changing. I think that is changing, but we're taught to be thinkers, and that's useful. But I think a lot of times we're taught that intuitive stuff, gut feelings, instinct, that these things aren't reliable or can't be trusted or are even a little bit silly.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of cognitive dissonance about it because I grew up in the evangelical church. And so, from that perspective, I was taught to believe in esoteric things, right? And to believe in God and believe in that sort of all of that kind of world. And so it's in me, it's hardwired in me. But then, you go to school, you do this, whatever, you're taught to use your brain a lot, and you can fall out of, it's practice, I think. And I think you can lose the practice of trusting your own intuition. I certainly did. And getting that back is really difficult. And trusting it, I think, is just a matter of experience. And so I can say, well, I had this nudge that said play music, and the next decade of my life I couldn't have predicted at all. And maybe I can trust that, you
Right.
know? But
Absolutely.
it's not a one and done kind of thing. You're fighting against, or you're working against decades of conditioning, practice of using your rational mind and ignoring your intuition. And so you go on YouTube and there's a zillion videos about how to uncover your intuition, how to trust your, and how to tap into your intuition. I don't think it's that difficult. I think it's much simpler than we make it out to be. I haven't done it. I'm not an expert at it, but I just feel the conditioning is not in that direction. But I think that's changing. Do you have a sense of that changing?
100%. I think
Yeah.
that's why, I had the gut or the intuition to start the podcast, if I'm being
Mm.
honest.
I was going to
Um,
ask you about that.
yeah, I've spoke about doing some kind of talk, project for a long time because I talk to people for a living, and coaching. I sit with 50 plus people a week, having conversations. It's not all around music. And sometimes it goes off in different directions. And I know that I have that skill set where I just enjoy talking. I have a background in social work,
Mm.
and psychology. And I'm like, when am I going to use that skill? I'm singing and playing and writing and doing my music thing. But it's different when you're having deep conversations with people. It's a completely different thing. So I always thought, when is it coming? And I've went through some of the hardest times in my life in the past couple of years, just a lot of life changes and stuff. And it really was an intuitive nudge. Like, it's now time to do this. Like, quit procrastinating and do it and start it. um Sometimes I feel like a lot of us know what we want. We know what we're supposed to do, or what we feel is what feels right to do, but the fear comes in and stops us from starting it is like one of the hardest parts. There's
Mm-hmm.
different stages, right? Like, you start it, then you get
Yeah.
through that and you get this exhilarating, like, I did it. I'm so feel so great about it. And then other things come up, that's only chapter 1. That's only chapter 1. And then you're going to go through different chapters of, oh, are people actually listening to me? Is this any good? Like, self-doubt comes flying in.
Of course. Yeah.
So now you're dealing with that. So now you're into chapter 2, and it's really just working through those moments. But always, what I try to do, and this is what I've always done with everything I do, whether it's music, my business running, and all these different things, is I always do try to go back to the original purpose or the original state I was in when um, that intuitive feeling of something that just brings me joy. Like,
Mm.
what was it that brought me there? It's the same thing with my music, man. I'm, as a musician, I'm sure you can relate to this. um you know it may be different for everybody, but for me, what happens is, when I'm in when I'm in a really dark place, I don't know if I want to use the word dark, but I'm in a very unsettling place. That's when I'll either do one of two things. I'll either binge write
Hmm.
or not write at all.
Right. Sure.
And I find it's much more dangerous for me when I don't write at all. When I turn that energy flow off, uh, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing, and I'm discovering that more and more. And so when I get in those places now, I have to sometimes sit back and go, do you remember when you were 11 and you're driving home with that first fake Stratocaster in the back of your car, and you're just excited to get home and plug it in and figure out what this thing can do?
Mm.
Those moments, or the first time you write that first song and you go, wow, I wrote that, like those are my words, and it was a beginning and an end. So it's actually making the hair on my arms go up, because when I have to go there to remind myself, don't get caught in it. And I think that's why at the beginning of the podcast, when I mentioned the business thing, I think it could be that I guess it depends on how you're looking at business,
Yeah. Sure.
business is definitely important, and it is a product of who you are. If you're into business and you're an entrepreneur and these types of things, as long as you don't have a negative attachment to it where it takes you away from the passion and the joy and the love of what you're even doing.
That
So
happens.
yeah, and so that's probably what I was more referring to. But in the music industry, you got to do that too, and you got to remember to love what you started. And in saying that, just to ask you something, you mentioned that you started a bit later, with, you said
Mm.
around 30 or whatnot,
Taking
or
it seriously. Yeah.
taking it serious. Did you have influence around music around you growing up? Like, did you have anything that actually like got you into this, or was this a personal
Well,
journey?
I grew up in a musical family for sure. I have three older sisters and a mom, and they're all wonderful singers. And so they used to sing together, four-part harmonies. Really, 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 like I sing and I sing backups for people, but I'm not in their league. They were all excellent. And so, and we're a church family, right? So there was a lot of music in church, especially the evangelical church. Music was a big part of that world. And so, I mean, I played in the church band. I brought a double bass pedal into church, man.
Oh,
That's where
nice.
we were at back in the day. Anyways, I was also the first drummer that they had to put the plastic screen in front of. So I wear that kind of a badge of honor, you know.
Right.
Um, I was a teenager. What do you want? So, and I was always a music lover too. Like when I was a kid, my parents had one of those giant record players. You're too young to remember this, but your record player used to be a piece of furniture, man. This thing was like, it weighed about 300 pounds. It was 6 feet long, probably. It was a whole cabinet, and you put your records in it, and you open up the top. It's like a coffin. You open up the top, and the turntable's in there, and an 8-track section. Heavy duty stuff, man. And when I was a little boy, I would be leaning against the speaker. I could curl up and lean against the speaker, and my parents had some like Elvis 45s and whatever, and I would just listen to those. And so even as a little kid, music was a thing that affected me. And so music was a part of everything in my life. Probably if I was in like I was content to be a solitary kid on my own in my room, there would always be music playing. And so it's always been in me. It's one of my enduring passions is music, and nothing makes you feel the way a song can make you feel. As a songwriter and as a music lover, I'm sure you know that. You know, if you are a person who's attuned to music, it makes you feel like nothing else can make you feel, whether that's happiness or sadness or anger or anything. Music evokes and invokes emotions like nothing else, and I've always been tuned to that. So it was natural for me. I took piano lessons as a kid with this. I won't say anything. I took piano lessons as a kid. I despised it. My older sister was a fabulous pianist. She had sheet music for like Styx and Journey, and she'd be playing and singing. Fabulous. I did not take to piano. I wish I had. In
Mm.
retrospect, it'd be great if I could play the piano.
Right.
I have like my grade 5 conservatory in piano. I can't play a freaking note, but I did not enjoy that. But it's weird because I always had this sense that I played the drums, even though I didn't. Like, I remember a kid asking me when I was like 10, "What instruments do you play?" And I'm like, "Oh, I play the piano and I play the drums." Never played the drums in my life, but it was in me. And then
Right.
the first time I sat behind a drum kit for real, I could play. I mean, I was not good, but the mechanics were already there. I could coordinate the feet and the hands. And so it's like there was some natural inclination to that in there. And music was so important to me. I was one of those, this may not resonate with you, but I was a Walkman kid. I came up in the 80s, man. I was a Walkman kid or a Discman kid. Always had headphones on. Music was a part of my identity, always, you know. It was tribal in those days, and maybe it still is, I don't know, but yeah, I was surrounded by music, and I loved it, and it just tapped something in me that nothing else could, except maybe books. You
Right.
know, books and music. It follows that I went into writing and playing music.
Well, that's awesome. So it was ingrained in you at a young age, but you didn't take it serious until your late 20s, 30 or early 30s or whatnot. That's when
No,
you actually got that kind of that nudge to
start
do
playing
something with
out
it.
for real. Like
Yeah.
as I said, I was a church drummer as a teenager, and that's an interesting kind of pressure. So I'm playing 3 or 4 gigs a week to, you know, 3 or 400 people
Right.
in some of the most judgmental environments a cat can play in.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's a certain amount of pressure in that, but I didn't actually start like getting seriously into bands and seriously playing out, and this notion of actually trying to pursue music as a something more than a hobby was not until I was in my 30s.
Right.
After a
Okay.
10-year hiatus, you know, and where I was off doing other things. But it's interesting, you take a 10-year hiatus, you realize how much you miss something. So in a
Mm.
way that kind of informed what came after. But taking lessons was vital, like trying to get my stuff together a little bit. It's tough in your 30s. Your hands aren't as pliable anymore. You know, you see these guys and girls who started playing when they were 3, and their dad was a
Right.
jazz drummer, and when they were
Right.
7 they were playing in clubs with their dad's band. It's like they learned all that stuff when their hands were soft. My hands were not soft, and they're
Right.
getting not less and less soft all the time. I'm 50 now, so um, yeah. I mean, there's a lot that I can't do that if I would be able to do if I had started working on stuff. But I was in a small town. Drum lessons, what,
Yeah.
you know? My path is my path, you know, for what it's worth.
100%. I mean, kids are definitely sponges. I see it in my own coaching.
I'm sure.
How much faster. A lot of times, what happens is the older we get too, as adults, we put up a lot of barriers. So, if I give direction to a 7 year old, if I give the same direction to a 45 or 55 year old, they're taking that in a little bit different. The 7 year old will just they'll just do it. It's like, oh, I'm being told what to do, I'll just do it. And then they apply it, and then they come back, they're like, oh, you mean like this? Whereas
Right.
the adult, not always, but a lot of times you'll give advice, and they'll come back and say, but why?
Right.
And you're like, oh, here we go.
Because they're in their heads, right?
Yeah, right. Can't I do it this way, or can't isn't there an easier way, or can't we go in this direction instead? Or it's like, okay, so it's just more complicated. And so yeah, as we're building up barriers as we age. And sometimes that's why it's good to be able to just like stop and just do. And I try to, sometimes I have to say to my students, just follow me for a minute, just follow what I'm saying.
Right.
And then let's question it later if it doesn't
Right.
work. Instead of
Yeah.
thinking it's not going to work, let's question it when it doesn't work.
Kids. The
Yeah.
kids, not to interrupt you, sorry,
Yeah.
but kids haven't developed that self-consciousness yet, you
Right.
know? And
Yeah.
I envy them so much. Because
Yeah.
as adults, we become so fearful of things and so self-conscious. I've been plagued by this my
Yeah.
whole life, especially as a drummer. Like the last 10 years of my life has been this enormous period of confronting a lot of these things.
Mm.
about attachment and about self-consciousness and about unworthiness and not feeling good enough. And music, I did a podcast recently where I talked about this concept of crucibles. Crucible is a melting pot, right? So in metallurgy, and if you want to melt something really hot, you put it in a crucible and it turns into something more pure and better and stronger on the other side. Music has been an enormous personal development crucible for me, pulling out these attachments, pulling out this self-consciousness, pulling out this overthinking through experience. And that 7-year-old kid just doesn't have all that gunk yet to try to work through. And so they're like, okay, well, of course I can do this or whatever. They don't even think about it. They just do it, whatever. 30 or 40-year-olds got 40 years of fighting the world, to get through to that. I have to be perfect. It has to be, it's
Absolutely.
exhausting. I envy kids for that. I really do.
Yeah. And we have past experiences that put us immediately in a place of fear. So if something failed in the past, and we're being confronted with something new, we immediately go to that failure, and go, okay, well, this failed last time and I didn't feel good, so now my anxiety is turning on and I don't like how this feels. And then that starts happening when you're really young, anywhere between, up till about age, I'd say just before puberty. I would say you're pretty set in just kind of going with the flow, and then puberty hits on, and kids start getting nastier to one another, and all these different things start to happen, and that's when things start to kind of go in a different direction. And that's what I've seen, at least
Yeah.
in the ages that I've taught, and having kids myself and all these different things, right?
How
So
old are your kids?
I have three. So I have a 13-year-old,
Yeah.
I have a 12-year-old, and I have a 1.5-year-old. So
Wow.
yeah, all different ages. They started young, and then yeah, so I get to see a little bit of all the differences, right? But even in teaching, teaching over 10 years and working with kids and adults, I probably have more adults than kids now, or the adults have turned, or the kids have turned to adults, and
Right. Yeah.
but yeah, I've got to see the challenges they face. And this is a great direction because before I got into music, I was big into social work, and I was working with youth and working in with troubled youth. You call
Mm.
it troubled youth. I was a troubled youth for a bit.
Yeah.
So I got into that when I started my teaching company. I was teaching guitar to youth centers. I was like, I'm going to combine the two. I'm going to
That's
start
great.
teaching music to kids that might need an outlet, right? So started doing that. And but I wanted to kind of go down the path because you brought this up, that in the last 10 years you've been dealing with just overcoming different things. And
Yeah.
um, I haven't had the pleasure of having someone on yet where we dug really deep into the topic of anxiety,
Mm.
and what what it is, and how it affects people, and the things that you can do to overcome it. I Just a really quick backstory: when I was around in my mid-teens, like in my early 20s, I suffered with what I would consider debilitating anxiety, to a point where I had severe, um I didn't know why I was anxious all the time. I knew that something wasn't right, but I was getting all the typical symptoms. I was getting all the physical symptoms of it, and I attribute that to dying. I immediately was like, well, this is it for me, and started thinking I was having heart attacks, and every little feeling in my body would turn into the deadliest disease ever created. And so my mind wasn't, separating reality from my illusions. And so this went
Mm.
on for a while, and it was a challenging time in my life. And I know why those things were happening now, but at the time, I was just a teenage boy just trying to get to adulthood and just survive. And that's when it hit me, and I started realizing, whoa, this thing's like real. And I had to start talking to some people, um, and that's what led me in the direction of teaching at the youth centers, because I could understand these kids. Yeah, they're labeled bad, they've done these horrible things, whatever they've
Right.
done, but they didn't just they weren't just born and decided to be that person. They did,
No.
something led them in that direction. And fortunately, I took more of a higher road and didn't get myself into too much trouble and tried to figure it out, you know.
Yeah.
But when did you, if you have you dealt with anxieties at all, or what does anxiety mean to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. So one of the great crucibles of my life was the pandemic, where I haven't necessarily had a identifiable anxiety, but I've always been fearful. And there are reasons for that. And during the pandemic, well, you want to go back a little bit further than that. A couple years before the pandemic, I was working, professionally speaking, I'm in corporate communications, and I was working for a law enforcement agency and just on a contract doing PR stuff. And for the first time in my life, I really encountered crime. You work for a police force and you suddenly find yourself immersed in it, you know? And so, I mean, I'm working in the media office. We have the police scanner going all day long. We have City Pulse News up on the TV, which is just wall to wall crime, bad news, fear, 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 fear.
Right.
So I found myself immersed in this really fearful world where everything around me was crime. Everything around me violent, was frightening. Never encountered that before. And it really began to mess with me. And what can happen is, you know, your view of things can become so narrow. You know, I remember talking to a police officer who's like, I don't live in this town anymore. I moved out of town because every place I go in this town, he was a veteran. Every place I go in this town, I have a bad memory of something that went down there, you know?
Right.
And it's very easy for you to become micro focused and for your world to become very small. And so what began to happen to me is that I began to see crime everywhere, right? I was immersed in it all day long. My whole worldview became, it's dangerous. There are criminals everywhere. So anywhere I would go, I would just begin to see everybody as a criminal. I am an empath, for those of you who are on the spiritual world. So I absorb a lot. I absorb a lot of emotion. And so I've had this sort of ticking time bomb in me since I was a kid, working in policing for a little while on a contract. Really began to focus my view in a dangerous way because I began to see 100% the world is dangerous, when in fact it was a very small percentage of the world that's dangerous. But you can become so focused on that you shut out everything else. And that's a dangerous place to be. And so I finished that contract and I went on with life, but it was still kind of, there was a panicky feeling inside me related to that, which when the pandemic hit, kind of popped. And it popped specifically with the George Floyd incident and the Black Lives Matter protests that followed it. One of the things that I stopped doing when I was working for the police force was watching the news, which is really interesting because 20 years ago, I was working a different job as a media officer where the news was my job. And so when I got into work in the morning, I would have a stack of newspapers waiting for me that I would comb through to get news on whatever we were doing. And nothing, you know. But after having been immersed in this sort of crime world, very sensitive to it, I stopped watching the news because it was causing so much anxiety because the news is so bad. The news is, if it bleeds, it leads. The news is fearful and it, again, it can focus you into thinking that everything is danger all the time. Some things are dangerous. Most of the world is not. And I stopped listening to, watching the news purely to break with the anxiety that it was producing in me. Pandemic comes. There was a certain amount of novelty in the pandemic at the beginning. And there was this really fun notion that this experience collectively was going to make us all better in the end. We were going to be more empathetic. We were going to be more open to our neighbors. We were going to pull together, which we know for the most part did not happen. For a minute there, it looked like this was going to be actually maybe existentially a positive thing. But then the lockdowns began. Again, I'm an empath. I began to absorb the fear in the world, and there was a lot of it. And I remember the first time I went to the grocery store and people were lined up outside like it was a science fiction movie, and there was armed security at the door, and that was really unsettling for me. So I began to feel anxiety around the pandemic, and then I made the mistake of turning on the news when the George Floyd protests were happening, because I'm a history person, and this was capital H history that was happening in the midst of this global thing, right? And for 3 days straight, I watched the riots happening on TV. And then I popped. I popped. Like an anxiety came over me that was, 47 years in the making. I had been enduring, I had been storing this fear, and then it just exploded in me. And the summer of 2020, I just sort of sat in my backyard shaking for a lot of that summer, just with overwhelming fear, anxiety, and it was absolutely awful. It
Mm.
was an enormously frightening time. And what my experience of anxiety is that anxiety will convince you that your worst fears are imminent or happening right now, even if they're not. I'm
Right.
sitting in the backyard on a beautiful, sunny, peaceful day in July, and my body is convinced that the worst possible thing is imminent. And my you begin to cortisol happens, adrenaline happens, you're ramped up all the time. I was in full on fight or flight with nothing happening, but you mentioned before about what's reality and what isn't. And I began to talk about this concept of real reality versus fake reality, because in my experience, and I should caveat this with saying I'm not a counselor, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a social worker. I have no credentials at all except my own experience. But my experience is that something possesses you. Anxiety is not your real mind. And anxiety can possess you. It can take over your brain, your mind, your thoughts. You begin to live in a fake reality, not a real reality. But the fake reality is very convincing. And when it plays on something as primal as your fear, it can be overwhelming. And
Yeah.
so I lost myself for a space of months. Go ahead. You got something?
Yeah, I do have something. It's really interesting. And I do want to kind of go back to that in a moment just to see where you went with it. But I want to say something that has spoke to me, and it spoke to me back when the pandemic happened, and I noticed it around me. And what that was is that I didn't experience anxiety during the pandemic.
Hmm.
I didn't experience panic. I was I was on the other side of it, where I would think, this too shall pass. This will be over. This will be, and I was very confused about why I wasn't having anxiety. And I had other people in my life, a few, who had experienced anxiety earlier in life, and they were saying the same thing to me. They were saying, I don't know why I feel okay.
Hmm.
And this was a conversation I had with a number of those people. Now, what on the other side, on the flip side of it, what I did see were the individuals that I thought always had it together starting to lose it.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think
So
that's about?
that is something I'm trying to uncover. And what I'm wondering, you said something very profound. You said that because you were around the age of 47 when it happened, right? Because you said about
Yeah.
47 years of your life all of a sudden at once just boom.
Stuff
And
you've been holding at bay. Yeah.
mm-hmm. And what I'm wondering is if there were people in this world who have had things that were slowly building, but not enough to tip over the water. You fill up the glass, it's not actually tipping over, but it's controllable. And then a large event comes in, like a global pandemic, um, And not only that, it puts you in a space where, okay, now you're stuck at home doing nothing. So all those things that you were distracting yourself with in life, no longer you can do. You
It's
just have to
true.
sit there and you have to bathe in this fear based event. And all of a sudden you've got people popping. You've got anxiety coming through them. They're not knowing what it, they're probably understanding what it is, but never felt it at such a magnitude. And you weren't the only person. I've known plenty of people who experienced high amounts of stress and anxiety during that time. I even think back to when I was really little, not super little, but young enough, when 9/11 happened. And
Sure.
again, another event, worldwide event, news. And I remember my fear. I always go to the absolute extreme. And I went to my mom and I said, "Well, I better get ready. I'm going to war." Like I was already, I had already convinced myself that that was happening, and that was where my mindset was then. And that was around that time where my anxiety was not in a good place. So yeah, by you saying that, it reminded me of the feeling that I had of. I mean, I wasn't enjoying the pandemic. I definitely wasn't. But what I would say was, for some reason at that time, I felt like this is a time when I need to step up
Yeah.
because I've dealt with anxiety. I don't ever believe anyone really truly conquers anxiety. I believe you learn to live with what anxiety does to you, and you get better at calming the fire. You get
Mm.
better at noticing when that fire has started so you can put it out before it's out of control.
That's
Um,
maybe true. Yeah.
yeah, I think once you've actually felt the implications of anxiety and what it can do to you, you can't forget it. It doesn't just disappear. You might get busy for a few years. You might get busy for a few decades, but there's always that chance that that guy's coming back or that girl's coming back and she or he is going to say, "Hey, remember me? Remember this feeling?" And then
Yeah.
it's up to you. It's the actions you take in order to overcome it. So what did you do what did you start doing? Like, did you do anything or did it
Right.
just naturally start to kind of dissipate?
Oh no, no, it didn't naturally dissipate. The first thing I would say is that in my experience, I think anxiety is about control. So I think a lot of people who are prone to anxiety but haven't really experienced it that much, when a pandemic comes and you begin to lose control of the world, right? You realize how fragile it all is. And there's lockdowns and all the things that you thought you were managing, that you were in control of, are gone. And you begin to sense you don't have nearly the control you thought you did. And I think anxiety is about that. In my case, I didn't feel as though the world was safe anymore. That started a few years ago. And what if this happens? What if that happens? I can't control all of these things. And then that's when anxiety begins to take over. And it's insidious. And it is a possession. I know this because
Mm.
when times came when I felt the fever kind of break, I would just sort of look up and be like, oh, I'm in charge again. Oh, it's me. Like I have been possessed by a thing. There is a school of thought that says anxiety is a physical thing that exists in your body. This is a childhood thing that you suppressed or not processed properly. And it is a physical thing, a physical energy that exists in your body. If you follow that, if you subscribe to that idea, this thing literally possesses your brain. You're not yourself. And it's to do with having control. All right. So for me, it was almost another intuitive thing. It was a recognition that I had to surrender control, right? Like it was a message to me that says, you can't control everything. And so you need to surrender that control to something else, something higher. And for me, I took it as a call to spirituality.
Mm.
It's like, I have to, I'm going to die if I don't lay this upon something else. And it's like it was a realization that I cannot control everything. And I have to have a faith in something that can, or that it's going to be okay. Like I had to lay this down. It was it was an incredible turning point for me to begin to two things: adopt a spirituality, and B, stop working from ego. All right. It was a culmination of 10 years where I was wrestling with ego attachments in the music world and working from an egoic point of view, which is not to say an arrogant or self-absorbed point of view, but from a point of view that needed my ego to be validated outside of myself.
Mm.
And so I would start playing with an artist and I would attach to that artist in a way because it fed my ego and it gave me an identity and it gave me a sense of being valid because I was this person's drummer or I was working with that band or whatever. And this caused me enormous pain. Attachment's what the Buddha said, attachment, suffering is attachment. That's where it comes from. And I was attached to all these identities that weren't me, but made me feel good because I was this person's drummer and I was touring in that place and I was doing this. And I was not working from an arrogance, but I was working from a place that needed my ego validated by these things. And it caused me, it was so important and so vital and so ultimately really, really helpful to go through these pain points, to recognize my attachments, recognize where they come from, and recognize that they cause pain and I need to surrender them. And this whole process of being not nudged, but bludgeoned over the head with you are not in control. And you need to stop working from this place of ego and begin to work from this place of spirit or intuition. I took the whole anxiety breakdown as that, as a call. Have you heard the term, the fall is the call?
I haven't, no.
The fall is the call. The fall from grace is the call to surrender yourself. Yeah. Whether that's whatever fall it is, you got caught drinking and driving and your license is gone, that's a fall and it's a call to surrender. Or whatever in your life. That was a big call. All right. So the initial thing was to recognize that I was being called to approach life in a much different, much less egoic way. And so I disappeared from social media for months. I stopped my podcast for months because I had to re-examine, why am I doing these things? Why am I posting this photograph to Instagram? What am I looking for here? I'm looking to have my tires pumped. I'm looking for attention, just like everybody else. And the reason that these platforms are so successful is because people want that attention. It's currency, it's dopamine, it's the whole thing. I'm not unique in that way. But I had to begin to really think about that. And I had to learn to surrender, which I've still not learned, by the way. It's 3 years later. I'm still working on this. So I set myself on a practical level to building a flagstone pathway at the side of my house. One of the things I've learned, especially in the throes of deep anxiety, is that if you can occupy your mind with something, something problem solving, something mechanical, it can pull you out of that. It can, that's not a long-term solution. It's an in the moment, I'm freaking out right now, I need to apply myself to something. So I applied myself to building this flagstone pathway. And I spent the summer literally forging a new path. Literally forging a new path. Delicious irony. Symbolism. And I had Ram Dass lectures just playing the whole, Ram Dass?
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I'm sure you do. Ram Dass is my spirit animal. And just the sound of his voice was soothing to me. And then I had to go through this process of enduring this feeling, this pain. And then, as I said, there would be moments when I would come out of it and I would just, it's like I'm waking up from a coma. Like, oh, that was a cloud I was in. One time I went to a party with, I'm lucky to have a wonderful friend group, my wife and I. And we went to a party during one of the lifts from lockdown when people could get together again.
Right.
It was a huge potluck. There was like 20 or 25 people there. It was a wonderful night. We're drinking wine, we're eating great food, we're socializing. And I realized partway through that the fever had broken. I was in real reality again. I wasn't in fake reality where it was all crashing down around me. And it's just a reminder that anxiety is a possession. It's not real, It's your body, your mind, your body has this enormous feeling of fear, and your mind needs a reason for it. Your mind has to rationalize, why is the body feeling this? Better come up with a reason. Well, it's because there could be a riot at any minute, or there's a, you know what I mean? Your mind comes up with justifications for the feeling you're feeling inside, but what you need to process is the feeling. And so, thank God, by that point in time, I'd already been working with a therapist for about 3 years. I went into therapy years before this just to untangle myself. I think everybody should go to therapy. I really do.
Right.
I was
Yeah.
having trouble sorting out my life. What do I want to do? What are my motivations and why? And so when this happened out of the blue, I already had a therapist with whom I had a great rapport. So she was able to really help me with just talking through this. Talking through is so important. All your stuff. And that was helpful. But I honestly had to endure initially and shake. And I had other really wonderfully symbolic things happen. I how much time have you got? I mean, it was this process of surrendering that I'm still in. And that's why I say the path is circular, because I'll kind of like, I'm in a period of time right now where I feel like I've taken 2 steps back with this process. And it's like, okay,
Mm.
what's going on with me? Not with anxiety necessarily, but with like unresolved anger or whatever. Like I'm prone to these things. And it's like, okay, how am I back here again? I thought we were doing so well, but it's all this process. And so I had to adopt a spirituality because I had to recognize that I'm not in control, and anxiety is fueled by wanting to be in control. I had to
Wow.
lay that down. That's
No, I love everything you said there because, again, as someone who's dealt with anxiety myself, I'm reflecting on myself as you're telling me your story. And you said adopting spirituality and releasing your ego, essentially, to a sense, right? Like releasing that attachment of ego. I have these conversations with different people, and I'll say, I understand I understand releasing the ego, letting go of that ego. I think it is attachment mostly and control that you need to
mhm,
learn to let go of. I think though, as spiritual beings having a human experience is the way I would look at things.
mhm.
I think part of that human experience is playing. And we're playing a part in this story, in this reality that we think is real. And in that, where I'm trying to still uncover the difference is I feel like a complete loss of ego is also something that's very difficult. Because if you completely lose the ego, I guess the question is, does the ego have anything to do with passion?
Who's to say? I mean, Ramdas could tell you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
For me, it was not about losing my ego. I think ego is important. Ego is what keeps you alive. Ego is what
Right.
identifies that you need food and shelter, and you come into this world equipped with one of those. So it's,
Right.
you need one. I think for me, losing the ego was just about my motivations primarily,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like not needing the world to acknowledge me, and not needing to be recognized, and not needing this validation from the outside. I was working from a place where everything I did fundamentally was about getting that response. It was not an arrogance, it was just a neediness, I guess. And then again, I'm working with an artist and I become identified with that artist and I attach to that identity. I'm this person's drummer,
Right.
and that makes me important, or that makes me notable, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And that creates I mean, somebody like me, that creates an enormous attachment. And then when that attachment, as soon as you're attached to something, you can lose it, right? And that's your ego holding on to that.
Yes.
Whereas
Yeah.
the spiritual part of you can look at a situation like that and say, here we are. And this is a moment, and it it may end, and that's all well and good also, right?
Right.
But can you begin to work from that place and lose that attachment and lose the associated pain that comes with it?
Mhm.
That's what I'm talking about in terms of ego.
Right. Yeah, I would see attachment as a negative aspect of the ego. So maybe what it is more we should be working on the positive parts of our ego and detaching from the negatives, because there's
Yeah,
negatives and positives to ego.
sure.
I just, and that's what I'm always working with, because, I'll listen to spiritual teachers and the idea of just not attaching or not being that ego, like letting go. And there's a little bit of a fear around that because,
Sure.
um, right. Because again, if I get back to the idea of Joe Broski, I'm the musician, I'm playing that part, and
Mm,
a little ego has to be there. If you're completely separate from that, um, then I don't know if I, and maybe someday, maybe as we age and we get closer to the end of this, uh, whatever this moment is in our time, that our ego, maybe the idea is we get less and less egoic in our journey, right? Because we may not require it as we get near the end of our life as much as we did in the beginning. But the spiritual balance is really important. And the reason why I was reflecting on my own life was I was this 15 to 20-year-old kid when I was going through my anxiety, and you were more in your mid to late 40s, and
yeah.
right. And I think that makes a difference. And the reason I say that, especially, I just think any youth, or I think if you're going through that, well, releasing your ego at that age is extremely difficult. That is when you're developing this, I need to be important. I need to have some purpose. Who am I going to be? And um, so to be able to just let go of that, that's really difficult. So, in my own personal journey in healing from anxiety issues was definitely adopting a spiritual, because at that time I was going and I was talking to psychics, and I was
Mm,
reading about NDEs. That's when my obsession with near death experiences started happening. Oh, okay. Maybe we're not just this. Maybe that's not it. Because I was reflecting on my own spiritual beliefs and everything. And, who is God? What is God? What are we? Like, what am I doing here? Like, what is this?
yeah.
You can get lost in that idea, and maybe it's better to go through it later in life, but then there's probably negative aspects of that as well, because now you're an established person, you might have a family, you might have all these things, these obligations, and all of a sudden you're just like struck with anxiety, and you're like, uh-oh, I'm supposed to be like in control and impact, like i I can't lose myself now. And that's difficult. So I guess there's two parts to it, right? But I was kind of just reflecting that in my mind.
Yeah. Well, I think you go through it when you go through it, I mean,
Right. Right.
when your time is come, you go through it,
Right.
I think life gives you warning shots, and you
Oh
can
yeah.
choose to pay attention to them or you can choose to ignore them, but they get louder and heavier as you go. And so all of this period of 10 years of having attachments to things and having real, like, I went through some extraordinarily painful experiences that I put on myself through my attachment, right? Lose a gig, and it crushes you because you're attached to that guy. And all of these were warning shots. Like, dude, you got to reframe your connection to these things. Don't listen, don't listen, don't listen, don't listen. Keep getting attached, keep getting attached, keep getting it until finally, life is like, well, you're not listening. So, boom, we're turning up the volume. Here's a
Right.
complete ego breakdown. Will you start listening now, please? Will you pay attention now, please? So,
Right.
some people are wise enough to catch catch it early, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
this is happening, I need to deal with this. I was a little more obstinate than that, and so I had to go boom. I had to go
Right.
boom, and it
Right.
was like, again, I take this as a real call, like, pay attention, you know.
In talking with people who've had NDEs and near death experiences, a lot of these are individuals who were ill because
Mm,
they passed away. Some of them it's car accidents and things like that where it
sure.
happens immediate. But in conversations I've had and books I've read, and a lot of them will say the same thing you just said.
Mm,
They'll say, I was getting warnings. I was
right.
getting warnings. and I wasn't listening. And then they're struck with something terrible, terrible illness or disease. Now, I'm not here to say that everybody is self-inflicting themselves into that point, because I don't want to put that out there, but there's something to it, because there's many people who can attribute to that, right? And in their healing part of it, it was the opposite of that. It's healing from the inside. Feel like, how did I get here? What were the warnings that I wasn't listening to?
Right.
Now I need to go back and figure that out. With me, for instance, with anxiety, I actually get physical symptoms before things are about to break down. I'll get more tension. As a guitar player, I deal with some hand issues because I get tense, and then I'm playing anywhere between 5 to 10 hours a day sometimes. Like, I'm just playing so much. So any part of your body where you're putting a lot of strain on, and if you're tense, there's an RSI, repetitive strain injury. It starts to emerge, and then you go, how did that happen? Why is this guy, why was ZZ Top playing like this until the day 85, 80 years old or whatever, and they didn't have any issues? Or why did, you think, okay, I'm like I'm pretty young, like what's going on? But you have to think, what else is going on what is going on? Like, what am I not listening to? Yeah. And I really do think that there are things that we can pick up on pretty quick before it happens. But so I love that though. But again, the spiritual part of it, I totally agree with. I had to go down that road in order to get over myself, to get over my self-control of everything, because that's not something we have control of, how we react, of the actions we take based on the things that come to us, but we don't necessarily have the control of everything, because we all have free will. And for whatever reason, we were all given that gift of free will. And someone cut you off on the road, how do you react? Do you beep and try to run them down and create a high amount of stress in your body? Or do you look at it as if, well, good thing they did that, because then, if you can find some kind of joy in everything, I think that's like it's such a purposeful way of direction. Like, if you can just always think of joy, and I know that's really difficult.
That's really difficult.
It's really difficult. But if you can do that, I think that's when you start kind of finding a different path, and all of a sudden things start coming to you more.
Yes.
And we know this. We already know this. We know when we're on that good energy vibe, good things start to come to us. And then something starts to it goes away, and then we get back to our place, and then we go, oh, remember when that was happening? Remember when all these great things were happening, because I was seeing it happening? It's not just coincidence. It's because we were
your awareness.
Goes back to you saying, when you had that focus on the news. I also don't watch the news, and I wrestle with the ignorance of it, because I feel terrible about the things going on in the world. Sure. And other people want to talk about those things with me. And what I do is I just say little prayers in my mind, like just little moments, because I say, I know something's going on. I know it must be terrible. And I pray for a good outcome, or I pray that those people are that there's a resolution or whatnot. Sure. If I'm dealing directly with that, I have to deal with it. But we are living in a time now where we're putting so much in our energy that is from outside and out of our control. And that's going to lead to anxiety.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And as we've said, the news is not representative. The news is overwhelmingly negative and fearful, and it preys upon the sort of darker angels of our nature. I mean, we've evolved to be very affected by and conscious of danger, right? So of course you're going to pay attention to dangerous headlines, because we're hardwired to watch out for predators. Like, this goes back hundreds of thousands of years. And I've had people say to me, and they're right, that it's a certain privilege to be able to ignore the news. In parts of the world, you can't ignore the news.
Absolutely.
And I recognize that, and I understand, as a global citizen, you have a certain responsibility. I also know that I'm in the process of taking care of myself right now. And I'm of no use to anybody if I'm overrun with anxiety. So there's a balance there, and I'm getting better. Like 3 years on from this, the anxiety is not debilitating anymore. I still feel it here and there, but I've come quite a long way on this path. Still wind up back at the beginning again sometimes. That's just part of the process, and I'm okay with that. But I don't have the same anxiety that I used to.
Right.
And that's been as a product of all of the stuff we've talked about. And so I am so much less driven by ego now. The ego doesn't want to be snuffed out, by the way. That's one of the reasons you struggle with it. The ego will protect itself. It'll find subtle ways to pull you back in. And so
I love that. It's true.
it's self-preservation. The ego wants to be preserved. It's fearful too. And it's like you have to find this ways of reassuring it that no, you're still part of the game, man. We're
Right.
just working in a different kind of way now. The
Yeah, I
good
like
news
that.
is that it's
Yeah.
possible to come through the other side of this, right? And I recommend therapy, therapy. Like I initially didn't want to go into therapy. Right? I had the same sort of stigma around it. Oh, come on, I'm a man, I'm an adult, I should be able to handle my stuff. It's BS. Go.
Yeah.
Even if you're not having any sort of negative thing, go and untangle yourself. Go and talk about your stuff. You may uncover things that you had no idea existed that were going to pop later.
Right.
you
Right.
know, like therapy's wonderful, and long term, if you have anxiety, that's an enormously helpful thing to do, is to speak to a professional and just release it through talking.
Right. Yeah.
So helpful.
I remember having so many epiphanies and moments when I did talk to a few counselors I had at the time. And um, if it wasn't for those moments, it may have been a harder journey. So I definitely recommend it as well to people. Not everybody has the same access to it, but there's normally something that can be done. There's
Mm-hmm.
generally services in different ways, and you just have to seek those
Yep.
services out.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but no, it's been great. So many things that I totally agree with and feel on the same page as you. Um, we're getting near the end of this, and one of the questions I always ask everyone, and it's a deep spiritual type question, and I've had so many different reactions to the question. It's been kind of fun to ask it. Um, but if you were to sum it up, and as you mentioned, like a Cole's Notes version before, but you know, why do you believe we are here?
Well, there's a school of thought that says we are all little pieces of God experiencing itself. Right?
Yeah.
There's this notion that we come from one source, and the source wants to experience life in this reality, and we are how that happens. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a compelling way to look at it. And then there are schools of thought whereby we've done this billions of times, reincarnation, and it's a part of an ascendancy to self-actualization or realization, or becoming a realized being. And maybe that's comforting, that's interesting. I don't like the notion that we're just randomly, as a product of biology, here. I i think there's more to it than that. The honest truth is I don't know why we're here. I wish I did.
Right.
If I knew and I could put that in the book, then I'd make a lot of money with it. The truth is
Right.
I don't know. What I
Right.
know is that we're here.
Right.
And so what do you do with the time while you are? What do you offer to the world in the time that you're part of it? I think that's the more practical question, right? It's like the whole thing with Ram Dass is that he existed to alleviate suffering. Mother Teresa, that's their mission. There's this notion of dharma, of what you were born to, what your purpose is. And so, from that perspective, you're here on earth to recognize, understand, and fulfill your dharma or your purpose on this planet. maybe that's true. I hope it's true. I don't know what mine is. I'd like to. you
Right.
know,
Still working towards it.
Still trying to
Right.
learn what that is, and the more you push the ego out of the way, probably the more that becomes clear to you. But I have not got there. I describe myself as the beginning man. I'm always at the beginning here.
Yeah.
I don't know why we're here, Joe. Why do you think we're here?
No, you know what?
You
Honestly,
got the answer.
I love the authentic answer of that because, it really is just to see what comes to you naturally. What is the first thing? And even though you said you don't know, you did give insight on, you know,
Smarter people than me have said those things. There's also simulation theory that says basically we're here in a video game. So
right,
maybe.
right. No, absolutely. But I do know that our reflection of how we treat people and how we spend our time here on earth makes a big difference, right? So you mentioned that. You mentioned just being pretty much being good to one another and doing the, using whatever purpose we have here, and that's important, right? Like if there's
Yeah.
something that you can help out with in society, then do it. And um but you know in saying that, I think that I truly believe this isn't, I shouldn't talk for everyone, but from my own conversations I've had with everybody, with a lot of people, I do find a lot of people feel like they're always searching for that answer, like what we're doing here. Like whether they're saying that, articulating it, or feeling it or thinking it, there tends to be this. And that's why I brought this question into my episodes, is because it is something that I feel like a lot of people don't question, and when they do, they go, "Whoa!" It could maybe invoke a little bit of anxiety
It
because
could break your brain.
they've never
Yeah.
maybe questioned that before.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I
So
don't I don't think we're here to accumulate stuff.
no,
I
right,
think I think the way we've structured society is psychotic. Um, Getting up before your body wants to get up to go
right,
work a job you don't want to do, to come home again and collapse while everybody else gets all the wealth from your labor. I'd sound like a commie saying that, but it's like I've looked objectively at how we live, and I think something's wrong. And you hear about tribes in places where everybody, or some of the poorest places in the world where everybody's way happier.
right, right.
And I think
Yeah,
it, that's something to do with priorities in the way. I think something's not quite right
it is wild. Yeah.
in the way we're living. Um, and I don't know. I don't know. I don't
No,
know. But
you're
I
right though.
think
There are, like you mentioned, the tribes in different places around there. There's places where they eat the same foods every night. It's potatoes and peas, and they don't need every different food to mankind. They don't need to accumulate any kind of specialty foods. They don't need to accumulate large homes and fancy cars, and I understand that. Um, so it's but they're very happy. I think if you accumulate those things and you're extremely happy and you're making a difference in the world, I think that's a beautiful life as well. But I do feel that some of us get lost in just searching for that, and that's the only purpose they have, is to accumulate, accumulate, accumulate,
well,
and
the
that's
marketing
where
is
I think
very
it's damaging.
powerful.
What's that?
The marketing is very powerful. Like
Right.
we've been kind of sold this ideal from the time we were born. That's the Western idiom is like you get a house and a car and a whatever, and your value is tied to how the level to which you've got those things, or you know what I mean. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being wealthy at all.
Right.
It's way more comfortable than not being wealthy, I'm
Right.
sure.
That's right.
And like, there's nothing wrong necessarily with any of this. It's just I think the priorities sometimes have made us chase stuff that's not all that edifying or even all that useful. And now social media makes it worse because influencers and
Hmm.
because. And it's very easy to get caught up in all of that because the marketing is really, really powerful. And it's very easy for me to say from my very comfortable middle class life.
Right, right, right.
Like
Yeah,
I recognize my quote unquote privilege. Like it's very easy for me to say, so I probably shouldn't say at all. Um, but all of that was just to say I don't think the purpose of being here is all of the accumulation we seem to be wrapped up in,
right.
and the distraction. And I used to live in Japan, and there was an essential spirituality in Japan that is missing here. Now, Japan's as gonzo and Western as any other place. Japan is really wild in some ways, and despite that, at the root of it, there was a certain spirituality that ran through that place that's ancient, because Japan is ancient.
Hmm.
Canada's not that old. Our culture is not that old. Theirs is. And there was a reverence there and a respect for nature at times that you could experience. And I experienced that.
Hmm.
One of the most profound things was on New Year's Eve when I was living in Japan. I lived in this small town. New Year's Eve, they have a ceremony, Joya no Kana, I think it's called, where they ring the temple bells a certain number of times. It's 118 times or something like that. And so you're lying in your bed at night and all is dark and all is quiet. And then just this solitary temple bell ringing, you know, and there is a peace and a reverence and a quietness in that that is so potent and so profound. And you begin to recognize that this exists in the world. This
Right.
peace is possible to experience. And we don't, because we're so caught up in all of the other stuff. There's nothing inherently wrong with all the other stuff, but it's like a lot of times we don't make the time to experience that deeper connection. And probably it would be helpful if we did.
Wow.
That's
I
all.
I love that. One of the final questions I was going to ask you is any words of wisdom and inspiration for people, and I feel like that actually spoke to it. It's
On one level, maybe.
on one level, yeah. If you have anything else to share, but I love how you said to let me rephrase it, because we're caught up in everything that we forget to take the time to
Yeah,
have balance and
yeah,
to
yeah.
remember who we truly are and what we're truly from and where we truly come from, whatever that is. But we
Right,
intuitively know it, but we're so busy we don't take the time to remember.
right. And what are we busy with? Like, my podcast episode this week is called Do Fulfilling Stuff. And it's all about this because I talked to a lot of musicians lately who, especially since the pandemic, have felt somewhat lost because the music industry disappeared and got gutted. And the way things were before the pandemic is not the way things are now. And a lot of musicians have struggled with that. Maybe you have too.
I agree.
This this
Yeah.
listlessness is like, what's the point really
Right.
anymore? And I think that a lot of adults feel that because life is extremely busy and they do not carve out even a little bit of time every day in pursuit of something more meaningful, whether that's holding on to the dream of playing music or practicing your instrument or writing or painting or whatever it is that is your real, gives you real meaning and gives you a sense of purpose and is something to work towards. A lot of people just don't make time for that. And it affects them because they're like, why am I living my life? Everything I do all day sucks. What's the point? And it's like, it's important to begin to carve in just a little bit of time for meaningful things every day to make you feel like there's some reason for you to have lived that day, and that can be simply providing for your family. That's utterly valid as a purpose. I think we're so wrapped up in, like, I scroll on my phone constantly and it's like I gotta stop doing this, but they're
Right.
so good at keeping you on that phone. And so,
It's like a drug.
100% it's a drug, and it's a good one. And
Yeah.
so it's like, how do we make time for things that matter to us? how do we make time to just be in quiet? We're never in quiet anymore, because even if it's quiet in your home, your phone is in your freaking hand, and it's like, I think people could benefit from just carving out a little bit of time for quiet to do meaningful things. That's one thing, as a piece of wisdom that I'm just discovering now, after having chatted recently with musicians about how they feel everything is pointless. Like, are you even playing now? No. Well, start.
Get
like
back to
tap
it.
back into that,
Yeah,
or even
absolutely.
if it's reading or whatever it is, tap back into that thing that fuels you. Even a few minutes a day. When I was teaching adults drum lessons, they're busy people. I'm like, just 15 minutes. Find 15 minutes to work on this exercise and play a couple of songs. That's all you need every day, to make progress and feel like you're doing something that matters, as opposed to just going to your job that you hate and hating it and coming home and being tired and hating that you are. Like, make some time for that. The other thing that I say, and this is my catchphrase on my podcast, is good things happen when you put yourself out there. So my whole story has been one of self-doubt and not feeling good enough. And it's why I didn't play in bands for all those years, because I didn't feel I was good enough. But when I finally listened to that intuition from Jamaica that said, play music now, and I put myself out there, everything that's unfolded since then is an utterly changed life, and all these experiences that I wouldn't trade for anything. So my encouragement is, put yourself out there.
Perfect.
Take a chance on your art, on being seen in whatever way it is that you're afraid to be seen. Incredible stuff happens on the other side of your fear. You need to push through. Take it from a person who's been very, very frightened and fearful. Amazing stuff is waiting on the other side of your fear, and the stakes are so much lower than you think they are. Like,
Awesome.
there's nothing to be afraid of. Like,
Right.
amazing stuff happens. My story is amazing stuff happens when you push through your fear and put yourself out there.
Right. Love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. John, where can people find you? Like, can you give us a little more detail on your podcast and what you're doing?
Okay.
Like, yeah.
Yep. The John Huff podcast, very simply named, is available wherever you enjoy fine podcasts. And that started off as an interview show 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago. It has since morphed into mostly a solo show where I talk a lot about what we talked about right now. I talk a lot about personal development, spirituality as I'm trying to experience it. I talk a lot about music because that's my frame of reference for everything. So every week I publish a new episode where I talk about stuff like that. The focus is positive talk. All right, there's a lot of podcasts out there that are clickbaity and salacious and negative, and uh, they do better than I do. But my show is all positive talk. So if you want once a week a positive voice in your ear holes talking about hopefully constructive things and edifying things, that's what I'm trying to do on my show. And I'm on Facebook and Instagram. I was on TikTok for a while, but it's like, I'm getting off of TikTok. I hate it here. So I'm not there. Instagram, Facebook, john-huff.com is my website. So my blog archives are there, including the tour blogs. There are 3 of them. And the music that I've played on and whatever, all that stuff is central. You can get the podcast there too. So john-huff.com is probably the catch-all for everything.
That's awesome. Is your book still available? You can still get the book, or is
There's a
that?
few copies kicking around. I could
Yeah,
make that happen if somebody was looking for
that's
it.
cool.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Thanks so much for being on, man. It's again, one of the beautiful things, and you can relate. First podcaster that I've talked to, and you have this idea of the way the conversation will go, and then you end it and you go, wow.
Didn't
And
expect that. Yeah.
I actually, no, I do. I feel blessed though that that I get to chat with people and because I'm gonna touch on one thing before I end this episode, is that, you've been talking a lot about not finding calmness or quietness. We always have our phone on us, this type of thing, right? And we all we text each other. we need to make sure we don't lose the art of communication,
Right.
proper communication.
Sure.
And I think that's why we were given the ability to speak, even just being in the same room with someone, as opposed to a device. There's something more about it. And I get to have these conversations with people and hear all these different, inspiring ideas. And then I do feel blessed about it because although I may agree with some things, I don't always agree with everything, but it gives me insight into question my own thoughts. And I would encourage anyone out there that wants to run a podcast or do something that they've been wanting to do for a long time to do it, because you'll gain more
when you put yourself out there.
That's right. And you can gain more out of it than you even think you could have originally. So anyway, John, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
I want to say thanks to all my listeners. Please like, share, subscribe as usual. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time on The Soul Inspired. Cheers. Thanks a lot. So